I don't know you, the amnesiac Duke told his wife, until she hummed the lullaby only he knew from childhood. I watched my husband say, I do to another woman. He didn't recognize me standing 10 feet away, disguised as a servant. The amnesia stole me from his mind. His stepmother made sure I'd never get back in until I hummed 4 notes of a lullaby his mother sang before she died. His face went white. The bride's smile cracked. And his stepmother screamed, "Stop that awful noise." She'd just revealed everything. But whether he'd choose me or her, that depended on what happened in the next 60 seconds. Hello, lovely. If you're enjoying this romantic tale, I'd be so grateful for a like or a subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories of love, longing, and history. And if you're up for it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every note, and it always brings a smile to my face. Chapter 1. The Stranger in Her Husband's Eyes. The candle beside Lord Alistair Hawke's bed had burned down to a stub the third Eleanor had replaced since dawn. She sat in the chair she'd occupied for 3 days straight, her spine aching, her eyes heavy with exhaustion she refused to surrender to. The physician had said Alistair might wake at any moment. She would not miss it. When his eyelids finally flickered, Eleanor's breath caught. She leaned forward, her fingers instinctively reaching for his hand, then hesitating in midair. Even now, after 5 years of marriage, touching him without purpose felt like trespassing. Alistair, her voice emerged as barely a whisper. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused and confused. They were the same stormy grey she'd memorized over countless lonely dinners, the same eyes that had looked past her for half a decade. But now, as his gaze landed on her face, there was something worse than indifference. There was nothing at all. Who? He tried to sit up, wincing at the effort. His hand moved to his bandaged head, where the riding accident had left its terrible mark. Please, don't strain yourself. Eleanor stood, her movements careful, controlled. You've been unconscious for 3 days, the physician said. I don't know you. 4 words, simple, factual, delivered in a voice still rough from disuse. They cut through Eleanor with the precision of a surgeon's blade. She had feared losing him to death. She had prayed through endless hours, bargaining with forces she barely believed in, begging them to spare his life. It had never occurred to her that he might survive and lose her instead. I am Eleanor, she said, forcing steadiness into her voice. Your wife. His brow furrowed, and she watched him process this information with the same analytical detachment she'd seen him apply to estate ledgers and parliamentary correspondence. Even amnesia, it seemed, couldn't erase the essential nature of Alistair Hawke Duke, landowner, man of duty and reason. My wife, he repeated slowly, as if testing the words in a foreign language. For how long? 5 years this autumn. Something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps, though it vanished too quickly to name. 5 years. And I don't remember you at all. Before the accident, you barely saw me either, Eleanor thought, but she said nothing. What purpose would bitterness serve now? The door opened, admitting Dr. Pembroke with his worn leather bag and perpetually worried expression. Your Grace, he caught himself, glancing at Eleanor's pale face. You're awake. Excellent. How do you feel? Confused, Alistair said bluntly. This woman claims to be my wife, but I have no memory of her. This woman, not even the courtesy of her name. Dr. Pembroke set his bag down and began his examination, asking questions, checking pupils, testing reflexes. Eleanor stood by the window, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles whitened. Your Grace, the physician said finally, you've suffered a significant trauma to the head. It appears to have affected your memory, though not uniformly. Can you tell me what you do remember? Alistair's response was measured, methodical. I am Alistair Hawke, Duke of Hawke. I inherited the title at 21 when my father died. I remember my childhood, my education, my duties to the estate and the crown. He paused, his jaw tightening. I remember everything up until, when exactly did we marry? 1842, Eleanor said quietly. June the 14th. I have no memory of anything past 1841. 5 years. 5 years of their marriage, erased as completely as morning mist under sunlight. Dr. Pembroke exchanged a glance with Eleanor, his expression grave. Amnesia of this nature is unpredictable, Your Grace. The memories may return gradually, or suddenly, or... He trailed off delicately. Or not at all, Alistair finished. He turned his attention to Eleanor, studying her with the same cool assessment he might give a painting he was considering purchasing. "You have the advantage of me, madam. You know everything about our marriage, while I know nothing. That seems an unfair position." "I can tell you whatever you wish to know," Eleanor offered, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "What did one say? We were strangers on our wedding day, and remained strangers ever after. You married me because your stepmother arranged it to secure an alliance. I married you because I was foolish enough to believe duty might someday become affection. Perhaps you could show me something. A portrait? Letters?" Eleanor moved to the mantelpiece, retrieving the silver-framed painting that usually resided in the gallery. She'd brought it to his room on the first night, a talisman against loss. The portrait showed them on their wedding day. Eleanor in ivory silk, orange blossoms woven through her hair, her eyes bright with nervous hope. Alistair beside her, tall and imposing in formal dress, his expression carefully neutral. She remembered that day with painful clarity, the way her hands had trembled as she signed the register, the brief, perfunctory kiss that sealed their union, the wedding breakfast where he'd spoken more to the bishop than to her, their wedding night where he'd appeared at her chamber door with the distant courtesy of a landlord greeting a new tenant, performed his duty with mechanical efficiency, and retreated to his own rooms before dawn. 5 years ago, she'd told herself that affection would grow, that patience and devotion would eventually soften his reserve. She'd been wrong. Alistair studied the portrait, his fingers tracing the gilded frame. "You look very young here. I was 20. You were 26. An arranged marriage?" Eleanor hesitated. Honesty seemed cruel, yet lies would serve no purpose. "Yes, I see." He handed the portrait back, his expression unreadable. "And we have been. Happy?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor thought of the countless evenings she'd spent alone, reading books Alistair would never discuss with her. The formal dinners where they sat at opposite ends of a table meant for 20, speaking only of weather and estate business. The separate bedchambers, the careful distance, the love she'd offered freely and he'd never thought to accept. "You have been content," she said carefully, "focused on your responsibilities. The estate thrives under your management." It wasn't an answer, and they both knew it. Alistair's gaze sharpened. "That tells me about me. What about you?" No one had asked her that question in 5 years. The unexpected consideration nearly undid her composure. "I have been. Lonely, hopeful, patient, foolish, well cared for." Something in his expression softened, just fractionally. "You're being diplomatic. I can deduce, madam, that a marriage arranged for political alliance rarely produces deep affection. You needn't pretend otherwise to spare my feelings." The irony was exquisite. Even without memory, he understood their marriage better than he had while living it. Dr. Pembroke cleared his throat. "Your Grace, you need rest. Lady Eleanor, perhaps you should—" "Of course." Eleanor set the portrait down and moved toward the door, grateful for the escape. "I'll leave you to recover, Your Grace." "Eleanor," she turned, surprised he'd used her name. "Thank you," Alistair said quietly, "for staying with me. However our marriage began, it appears you've been dutiful." Dutiful, the word she'd heard him use 1,000 times to describe obligations and responsibilities. Now, he applied it to her vigil at his bedside. She should have been wounded. Instead, she felt something harden inside her, not anger, but determination. "Rest well, Your Grace," she curtsied, a formal gesture that felt suddenly absurd between husband and wife, and left the room. The corridor stretched empty before her. Eleanor walked until she reached the portrait gallery, where she could no longer be overheard. Only then did she let her composure crack. She didn't weep. She'd learned years ago that tears changed nothing. But she pressed her hand against the cold stone wall and let herself feel the full weight of this new loss. Before the accident, Alistair had been distant but present. He'd known her name, acknowledged her existence, performed the basic courtesies expected between spouses. She'd survived on crumbs of attention, convincing herself that someday he might notice the woman who'd loved him from the moment she'd first seen him. Now, he looked at her and saw a stranger. Eleanor straightened, smoothing her wrinkled gown, pushing back the hair that had escaped its pins during her 3-day vigil. Somewhere in this vast estate was a woman who'd once been young and hopeful, who'd believed love could bridge any distance. She would find that woman again, not for duty this time, but for truth. "I will make you remember, Alistair," she whispered to the empty hallway, her voice steady with new resolve. Not our marriage, but what your heart has forgotten. She didn't yet know how, but she knew this. She'd spent 5 years loving a man who couldn't see her. She wouldn't spend 5 more as a stranger in her own home. The game had changed, and Eleanor Hawke, the invisible Duchess, was done being overlooked. Chapter 2. Ghosts of a Marriage. The portrait gallery stretched the length of Hawke Manor's east wing, its walls lined with generations of stern-faced nobility. Eleanor walked slowly beside Alistair, acutely aware of the careful distance he maintained, neither close enough to suggest intimacy nor far enough to appear rude. The distance, she realized with bitter irony, was exactly what he'd always kept. "This is your grandfather, the 7th Duke," Eleanor said, gesturing to a painting of a severe man in military dress. "He fought in the Peninsular War. You told me once that he taught you to ride when you were 5. Alistair studied the portrait with analytical interest. "I remember him, stern but fair. Died when I was 14. He moved to the next frame. "And this? Your father, the 8th Duke." "I remember him as well." Alistair's voice was carefully neutral, but Eleanor caught the slight tightening around his eyes. The late Duke had been a cold man, more concerned with legacy than family. Like father, like son, she'd often thought during her lonely marriage. They walked further, and Eleanor stopped before their wedding portrait, larger than the one in his bedchamber, prominently displayed among the family line. "We look very formal," Alistair observed. "It was a formal occasion. You look nervous." "I look," he tilted his head, "resigned." Eleanor's throat tightened. Even without memory, he could read the truth in their younger faces. "As you said yesterday, arranged marriages rarely produce passionate devotion. Was there someone else? For you, I mean, before our arrangement?" The question startled her. In 5 years of marriage, he'd never asked anything so personal. "No," she said quietly. "My father died when I was 17, leaving debts. Your stepmother knew my mother from school and proposed the match. It solved both our families' problems. My mother gained financial security. Your estate gained connections to the textile industry my family once controlled. A business transaction." "Yes." Alistair was silent for a long moment, studying her face in the portrait. "And you agreed to this? To marry a stranger for money? I had little choice, but I hoped." She stopped herself. "What did you hope?" "That you might love me, that duty might become affection, that I wouldn't spend my life invisible in my own home, that we might find contentment together," Eleanor said instead. "And did we?" Before she could answer, the gallery door opened. Lady Marigold swept in, her silk gown rustling, her expression perfectly arranged in maternal concern. "Alistair, dear boy, you shouldn't be taxing yourself so soon." Marigold moved to his side, pointedly positioning herself between him and Eleanor. "Doctor, Pembroke said you need rest, not exhausting tours through dusty galleries." "I feel quite well, stepmother." Eleanor was helping me understand. "Eleanor has been very attentive, I'm sure," Marigold interrupted smoothly. "But perhaps too attentive. Sometimes, dear, the mind needs space to heal naturally. Forcing memories can be dangerous." Eleanor recognized the subtle poison in those honeyed words. Marigold had never approved of their marriage, not because she cared for Eleanor's happiness, but because she'd wanted Alistair to marry someone who could elevate her own social position. "I'm not forcing anything," Eleanor said quietly. "Alistair asked to see the portraits." Of course. Marigold's smile didn't reach her eyes. "But you must understand, your marriage was arranged quite hastily. Political necessity, nothing more. Perhaps some memories are best left forgotten, rather than dredged up to cause unnecessary strain." Alistair's gaze moved between them, his expression unreadable. "If you'll excuse me," Eleanor said, "I should see to the household accounts. Your Grace, if you need anything." "Thank you, Eleanor." His tone was polite, distant, exactly as it had always been. She left them in the gallery, Marigold's voice following her down the corridor. "Now, let me tell you about the upcoming estate matters that require your attention." Eleanor found Alistair in the library that evening. He sat at the massive oak desk, his desk, where he'd spent countless hours during their marriage while she read alone by the fire. Now, the desk was covered with correspondence, ledgers, and documents. "Researching yourself?" Eleanor asked from the doorway. He looked up, and something in his expression seemed almost sheepish. "I found 5 years of letters and records. I thought perhaps facts might illuminate what memory cannot." Eleanor moved into the room, taking the chair across from him, her chair, where she'd sat so many evenings, hoping he might look up from his work and actually see her. "Have you learned anything?" "That I am apparently very concerned with crop rotation and parliamentary proceedings," he gestured to the papers. "But there's remarkably little of a personal nature. No love letters, no intimate correspondence. We weren't that sort of couple." Alistair set down the document he'd been reading. "Eleanor, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to be honest with me." Her heart quickened. "Of course. Were we happy?" The question hung in the air between them, simple and devastating. Eleanor thought of 1,000 careful evasions, but something in his direct gaze demanded truth. "You were content," she said slowly. "Focused on your duties, the estate, your seat in Parliament, your obligations to the tenants. You were a good duke. Fair, conscientious, honourable. That's not what I asked." "No." Eleanor folded her hands in her lap. "You were content." "I was. Hopeful." "Hopeful for what?" "That contentment might one day become something more." Alistair leaned back, his eyes never leaving her face. "And did it?" Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "You would have to answer that yourself. But given that we maintained separate bedchambers, dined at opposite ends of a table meant for 20, and could go days without speaking more than necessary courtesies, I suspect you would say the arrangement was adequate to its purpose, which was to produce an heir and maintain social standing. And did we produce an heir? No. The word came out more sharply than she'd intended. 5 years of hopes deferred, of rare visits to her chamber performed with dutiful efficiency, of the monthly disappointment that became its own kind of grief. We did not. Alistair was quiet for a long moment. "I'm trying to understand who I was, who we were together, but every answer reveals something rather bleak." "Our marriage was not a romance," Eleanor said carefully, "but neither was it cruel. You were never unkind, Alistair. Simply absent. Present in body, perhaps, but your mind and heart were always elsewhere. With my duties. Always with your duties." He stood abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked the gardens. "Then perhaps Marigold is right. Perhaps some memories aren't worth recovering." The words stung more than Eleanor expected. She rose, her hands gripping the chair back. "Is that what you truly want? To simply erase 5 years and start fresh? Would that be so terrible?" He turned to face her. "If what you describe is accurate, I was a poor husband, distant, cold, treating you as an obligation rather than a partner. Why would either of us wish to resurrect that?" "Because I loved you," Eleanor thought. "Because somewhere beneath your duty and reserve, I believed there was a man capable of love. Because for 5 years I hoped, and even now, standing here as a stranger to you, I'm still foolish enough to hope." "Because it's the truth," she said instead. "And doesn't truth matter, even when it's uncomfortable? Facts matter. Truth." He shook his head. "Truth seems rather more slippery." Eleanor moved toward the door, then paused. "There were moments," she said quietly, "brief ones, when I would find you in the gardens at dawn, or hear you playing piano when you thought no one was listening. Moments when I glimpsed someone beneath the Duke's mask. Those moments gave me hope that perhaps, someday..." "Someday what?" "That you might see me." She didn't wait for his response, closing the door softly behind her. That night, Eleanor sat in her chambers, the fire burning low. In her hands, she held a small leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. Alistair's mother's diary, found years ago in a locked trunk in the Dowager's apartments. Eleanor had discovered it early in her marriage, during one of her lonely explorations of the manor. The late Duchess had been dead for over a decade, but her words still breathed life from the pages. Words about her son, about love, about a lullaby she'd sung to soothe him through childhood fears and fevers. Eleanor had memorized that lullaby, treasuring it like a secret map to her husband's heart. She'd imagined singing it to their children one day, passing down this piece of Alistair's mother to the next generation, but there were no children. And now, the lullaby represented something else, a key that might unlock memories, might break through the walls between them. She traced the faded musical notation in the diary's margin. It would be so easy. Hum the melody, watch recognition dawn in his eyes, use his mother's memory to bridge the gap his accident had created. But would it be real? Or simply another manipulation? Another way of binding him through obligation rather than choice? Eleanor closed the journal, pressing it to her chest. "He needs to want to remember," she whispered to the empty room. "Not be forced to." She had spent 5 years as a ghost in her own marriage. She would not begin this new chapter with deception, no matter how tempting. If Alistair was to remember her, to truly see her, it had to be his choice, even if that choice was to walk away. Chapter 3. The Viper's Entrance. Lady Marjorie Sutton arrived at Hawk Manor in a carriage that gleamed like polished obsidian, drawn by matching black horses that could have graced a royal procession. Eleanor watched from the drawing-room window as Marjorie descended in a swirl of emerald silk, her golden hair artfully arranged, her beauty so carefully cultivated it seemed almost weaponized. "How kind of Lady Marjorie to call," Marigold said from behind Eleanor, her voice dripping with false warmth. "She and Alistair were quite close before your marriage. I'm sure her visit will lift his spirits immensely." Eleanor's fingers tightened on the curtain. She knew about Marjorie not from Alistair, who'd never spoken of his past courtships, but from the servants' whispered gossip. Before his father's death, when Alistair was still simply Lord Hawke, he'd briefly courted the beautiful daughter of Viscount Sutton. The courtship had been casual, perfunctory, ending when duty called him elsewhere. For Alistair, it had been nothing. For Marjorie, it had been everything. She'd been poised to become a duchess, only to watch Alistair's father die and the title pass to a man who'd chosen duty over her ambitions. She'd married a wealthy baron instead, been widowed within 2 years, and spent the subsequent time haunting society events like a beautiful ghost, always watching, always waiting. Now, it seemed, she'd found her opportunity. "Eleanor, dear, do come greet our guest," Marigold called, already moving toward the entrance hall. "I'm sure Marjorie is eager to see how well you've been managing during this difficult time." The words were courteous. The subtext was clear. "Let's see how you measure up." Marjorie swept into the drawing room like a visiting dignitary, her perfume something expensive and cloying, announcing her presence before her voice did. "Alistair." She moved directly to him, hands extended, bypassing Eleanor entirely. "When I heard about your accident, I simply had to come. We've known each other since childhood. I couldn't bear to stay away during your recovery." Alistair stood, and Eleanor watched something shift in his expression. Recognition, relief, the warmth of familiar territory in a landscape that had become foreign. Lady Marjorie. He took her hands, his smile more genuine than any Eleanor had seen since his awakening. "Forgive me, but I'm at a disadvantage. I'm told my memory has been selective in what it's retained." "Oh, you remember me, surely." Marjorie's laugh was musical, practiced. "We used to race horses across your father's estate. You always won, though I suspect you let me win once or twice to preserve my dignity." "I do remember." Wonder touched his voice. "You had a grey mare, Lady Silver." "You do remember?" Marjorie's eyes sparkled with triumph that she didn't quite hide. "Oh, Alistair, I'm so relieved. The doctors weren't certain what you'd retain." Eleanor stood near the fireplace, suddenly feeling like an intruder in her own home. She watched them reminisce, watched Alistair's face animate with an engagement she'd never inspired, watched Marjorie touch his arm with casual familiarity that 5 years of marriage had never granted Eleanor. "Lady Eleanor," Marjorie finally acknowledged her, with the same attention one might give a piece of furniture. "How trying this must be for you. I do hope you're managing the household adequately during Alistair's incapacity." "His Grace is recovering well," Eleanor said evenly. "And the household continues as always." "Of course it does. How efficient you are." Marjorie's smile held poison beneath its sweetness. That's what Alistair always valued in a wife, wasn't it? Efficiency. Marigold intervened with practiced smoothness. "Marjorie, you simply must stay with us for a few days. I insist. Your presence would be so beneficial for Alistair's recovery. Familiar faces, old memories. It might help restore what's been lost." Eleanor opened her mouth to object, but Alistair spoke first. "That's generous of you, stepmother." "Lady Marjorie, if it's not an imposition." "No imposition at all," Marjorie assured him. "I'd be delighted to help in any way I can." The decision was made without Eleanor's input, as most decisions in this house had always been made. Over the following days, Eleanor watched Marjorie work with the precision of a master strategist. She walked with Alistair in the gardens, their conversation flowing easily as they discussed memories from before Eleanor's time. She played piano in the music room while he listened, reminding him of concerts they'd attended together in their youth. She laughed at his observations with genuine delight, making him feel clever and seen in ways Eleanor's quiet devotion never had. From the library window, Eleanor observed them now, strolling among the rose bushes. Marjorie's hand rested lightly on Alistair's arm. He was smiling, relaxed, more at ease than Eleanor had seen him in 5 years of marriage. They make a handsome couple, don't they? Eleanor turned to find Marigold beside her, also watching the garden scene. He's my husband, Eleanor said quietly. A husband who doesn't remember you. Marigold's voice was gentle, sympathetic, deadly, while Marjorie represents everything he does remember. His youth, his freedom, the life he had before obligation trapped him. Our marriage was your arrangement, an arrangement I've come to regret. Marigold sighed theatrically. I thought you'd make him happy, dear, but one cannot force affection where none exists. Eleanor didn't respond. Below, Marjorie had said something that made Alistair laugh, a real laugh, unguarded and genuine. Marjorie mentioned something troubling to me yesterday, Marigold continued, her tone carefully measured. She said she'd seen you in London last season, dining with a certain gentleman at the Clarendon. Lord Ashford, I believe? He's quite handsome, they say. Eleanor's head snapped around. I've never dined with Lord Ashford. I barely know the man. Of course, dear. I'm sure it was a misunderstanding, though Marjorie did seem quite certain. Marigold let the implication hang in the air like smoke. She also mentioned the marriage seemed rather strained before the accident, that you and Alistair were leading increasingly separate lives. We've always led separate lives. That's hardly news. No, but it does make one wonder, doesn't it, whether this accident might be an opportunity for all of you. Marigold swept from the room, leaving Eleanor alone with her implications. That evening, Eleanor found Marjorie in the music room, arranging flowers with calculated casualness. Lady Marjorie. Marjorie turned, her smile bright and false. Lady Eleanor, I was just thinking how dull these arrangements were. The housekeeper has no eye for beauty. I know what you're doing. Marjorie's smile didn't falter. I'm afraid I don't understand. You're trying to insert yourself into my marriage, telling lies about me, working with Lady Marigold to undermine me. My dear Eleanor, Marjorie's voice dripped with condescension, I'm simply spending time with an old friend during his recovery. If you feel threatened by that, perhaps you should examine why your position feels so precarious. My position as his wife. Your position as a woman he was forced to marry and never loved. Marjorie's mask slipped, revealing the venom beneath. I'm simply reminding the Duke of who he was before he was trapped in a loveless arrangement, before duty stole his choices, before you. Eleanor felt the words like physical blows, but she held her ground. He married me. Whatever the circumstances, he chose honor over abandoning his obligations. How romantic. Marjorie's laugh was cruel. You cling to duty and honor because you have nothing else. No passion, no connection, no love. Just the legal bond of a marriage that was cold even before he forgot you existed, and yet I'm still his wife. For now. Marjorie moved closer, her perfume overwhelming. But memory is a fragile thing, Eleanor, and Alistair is remembering who he was before you, who he could be again, if freed from obligations he never wanted. You cannot erase 5 years of marriage. I don't need to erase them. He's already forgotten them. Marjorie's smile was triumphant. All I need to do is make sure he doesn't want them back. Eleanor held Marjorie's gaze, refusing to look away despite the fear coiling in her chest. You're wasting your time. Alistair is a man of honor. He won't abandon his vows, won't he, when his vows are to a stranger, when the woman he does remember offers him everything that stranger never could? Marjorie tilted her head. Face the truth, Eleanor. You've already lost. You just haven't admitted it yet. She swept from the room, leaving Eleanor standing among the flowers, her heart hammering, her hands trembling. The chapel on the estate grounds was small, ancient, its stone walls holding centuries of prayers. Eleanor knelt before the altar as moonlight streamed through stained glass, painting the floor in fractured colors. She didn't pray for Alistair's memory to return. That felt like begging for miracles she didn't deserve. She didn't pray for Marjorie to leave or for Marigold's schemes to fail. That felt like asking for rescue rather than earning victory. Instead, Eleanor closed her eyes and whispered into the silence. Give me courage. Courage to stop being invisible. Courage to fight for what was hers. Courage to show Alistair not the ghost of a wife he'd never loved, but the woman who had loved him through 5 years of coldness and distance. Courage to become someone worth remembering. The chapel offered no answers, no divine intervention, but as Eleanor rose from her knees, she felt something shift inside her, not hope, exactly, but determination. Marjorie was beautiful, charming, familiar. She represented Alistair's past, but Eleanor was his wife, his present, and she would fight for their future, even if that future looked nothing like the lonely marriage they'd had before. She would not be erased, not by amnesia, not by scheming rivals, not by her own fear. The war for Alistair's heart had begun, and Eleanor Hawke, the invisible Duchess, was done surrendering without a fight. Chapter 4. Fragments of Truth. Eleanor entered the breakfast room the next morning with the nervous energy of a soldier approaching battle. For 5 years, she'd taken breakfast alone in her chambers, never daring to intrude on Alistair's solitary morning routine. Today, that changed. Alistair looked up from his newspaper, surprise flickering across his face. "Eleanor, good morning." "Good morning." She moved to the sideboard with forced casualness, selecting toast and tea. "I hope you don't mind the company," I thought. "Well, we should perhaps become better acquainted." A pause then. "I'd like that." Eleanor sat not at the distant end of the table as she once had, but 3 chairs away, close enough for conversation, far enough to avoid presumption. "What are you reading?" she asked. "Parliamentary news. Debate over the Factory Acts." He folded the paper, giving her his full attention. "I'm told I have strong opinions on labor reform, though I confess I'm relearning my own positions from correspondence." "You do? You believe manufacturers should be held accountable for worker safety. You once told me." She stopped, uncertain. "Please, continue." "You said that a man's title means nothing if he doesn't use his influence to protect those who cannot protect themselves." Something shifted in Alistair's expression, recognition, perhaps, of his own philosophy. "That sounds like something I'd believe. Did we discuss politics often?" Eleanor's laugh was bitter before she could stop it. "No. That conversation happened at a dinner party 2 years ago. You were speaking to Lord Melbourne. I overheard from across the room. We didn't speak at dinner parties. We barely spoke at all." The honesty hung between them, uncomfortable but necessary. "I'm beginning to understand," Alistair said slowly, "that I was rather terrible at being married. You were excellent at being a duke. That seemed to be enough for you. And for you." Eleanor met his eyes. "I learned to find contentment in smaller things. Books, music, the gardens in spring. That sounds unbearably lonely." It was. They sat in silence, but it wasn't the cold absence of their previous marriage. It was something different awareness, perhaps. The beginning of seeing each other as people rather than obligations. "Tell me about your childhood," Alistair said finally. "Not the facts I might find in marriage contracts, the real memories." Over the following days, Eleanor discovered something remarkable. Without the weight of their failed marriage between them, Alistair was curious about her. They walked the estate together while she told him about growing up in Somerset, about her father's textile mills before they failed, about learning piano from a temperamental Italian teacher who once threw sheet music at her for missing a note. "You laughed when you said that," Alistair observed one afternoon as they toured the conservatory, as if it were a fond memory rather than a traumatic one. It was both. "Signor Castellano was a tyrant, but he taught me that music could express what words couldn't, that sometimes the most beautiful melodies come from difficult practice." "Do you still play?" Eleanor hesitated. "Sometimes, when I think no one is listening." "Why hide it?" "Because," she touched a orchid bloom, not meeting his eyes, "because you never asked to hear me, so I stopped offering." She felt him studying her, that analytical gaze that had once looked through her, now looking at her with something like regret. "I truly was a poor husband," he said quietly. "You were a devoted duke. Perhaps that's all you had room to be." That evening, Eleanor slipped into the music room, seeking solace in melody. The pianoforte sat silent in the corner, but she wasn't ready for that yet. Instead, she went through the cabinet of sheet music, pulling out pieces she hadn't touched in years. She didn't notice Alistair in the doorway. Holding a stack of music, Eleanor began to hum a simple air her mother used to sing. Nothing profound, just a fragment of remembered comfort. Her eyes were closed, and for a moment she was 17 again, before debts and duty and disappointing marriages. When she opened her eyes, Alistair was there. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I didn't mean to disturb." "Don't apologize." He moved into the room, drawn forward by something he couldn't name. "That melody, what is it?" "Just something my mother sang. It's nothing important." "It seemed important, the way you were humming it, like it meant something. Eleanor set down the sheet music, suddenly self-conscious. My mother died when I was 19, 2 years before our marriage. Music was something we shared. Sometimes I hum her favorites and feel less alone. Alistair moved to the window, his back to her. You've been alone for a long time, haven't you? Even before my accident. Yes. I wish I could remember you. He turned, and Eleanor saw something raw in his expression. Not as my wife, not as an obligation I failed at, but as you, the person who finds comfort in music, who loved her mother, who somehow survived 5 years of being invisible. I'm not sure that person is worth remembering. I think she is. He took a step closer. You seem kind, genuine, patient beyond reason. I look at our wedding portrait and wonder what you saw in me that made you say yes. I saw a man who loved his estate, his tenants, his duties. I thought perhaps he might have room for one more thing to care about. And I didn't. You didn't know how. Your father raised you to value duty above all else. You were simply being what you were taught to be. Alistair studied her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. You understand me better than I understand myself. I've had 5 years to observe you. You've had 2 weeks. Then help me. Not remember, I don't know if those memories are coming back, but help me understand who we were, who we might have been, if I'd been less of a fool. Eleanor's heart hammered. This was the conversation she'd dreamed of for 5 years, Alistair seeing her, asking about her, wanting to know her, and now that it was happening, she found herself terrified. I can try, she whispered. The moment stretched between them, fragile and new. Then Marjorie's voice shattered it. There you are, Alistair. She swept into the room with Marigold at her heels. I've been looking everywhere for you. I have the most wonderful news. Alistair stepped back from Eleanor, and she felt the loss like a physical thing. Lady Marjorie, he said politely. What news? I'm hosting a ball, a grand affair, in your honor, to celebrate your recovery and reintroduce you to society. Marjorie's smile was radiant. Everyone is so eager to see you, to welcome the Duke of Hawk back among us. Marigold nodded enthusiastically. What a marvelous idea. Exactly what Alistair needs. Familiar faces, old friends, a chance to reconnect with the world beyond these walls. Eleanor saw the trap immediately. A ball filled with Marjorie's allies, people who remembered Alistair before his marriage, who would reinforce Marjorie's narrative and Marigold's poison. I'm not certain Alistair is ready for such an event, Eleanor said carefully. Dr. Pembroke advised limited exertion. Oh, it's weeks away yet, Marjorie interrupted. Plenty of time for recovery. And surely you want Alistair to resume normal life, unless you prefer keeping him isolated here. The implication was clear. Object and seem controlling. A possessive wife, trying to hide her husband from the world. Alistair looked uncertain. A ball does seem rather overwhelming. Nonsense, Marigold insisted. You were always the life of such gatherings. It will remind you who you truly are, a duke, a gentleman, a pillar of society. Not just, she glanced at Eleanor with barely concealed disdain, not just a confused invalid hiding in the country. I think it's a splendid idea, Marjorie pressed. Don't you want to see your old friends, Alistair? To feel normal again? Eleanor watched him waver and knew she'd lost this round. If she fought too hard, she'd seem desperate. If she didn't fight at all, she'd lose him to Marjorie's carefully orchestrated trap. Of course, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her chest. If Alistair wishes to attend, I support the decision. Marjorie's smile was triumphant. Wonderful. I'll begin preparations immediately. Later that night, Eleanor discovered Marigold in the locked room that had belonged to Alistair's mother. The door stood ajar, light spilling into the corridor. Lady Marigold? Eleanor pushed the door open. What are you doing here? Marigold straightened from a trunk of belongings, her expression momentarily startled before smoothing into practiced innocence. Eleanor, dear, I was simply organizing some old family heirlooms. This room has been neglected for so long. Eleanor's gaze swept the room. Jewelry boxes lay open, gowns were draped across chairs, and a shelf that once held trinkets stood conspicuously empty. Where is the music box? Eleanor asked. The silver one that sat on the vanity. Music box? I'm afraid I don't recall. The one that played a lullaby. Alistair's mother's most treasured possession. Marigold's eyes hardened. Oh, that old thing. Broken beyond repair, I'm afraid. I had it disposed of. Surely you don't expect me to maintain every mouldering relic in this house?" Eleanor's hands clenched. The music box had been perfect when she'd last seen it a month ago. "That wasn't your decision to make. Those belonged to Alistair's mother. And I am the Dowager Duchess. This estate's maintenance falls under my purview." Marigold moved toward the door, forcing Eleanor to step aside. "Unless you're suggesting you have more authority here than I do, I'm suggesting you're destroying evidence." "Evidence of what, dear?" Marigold's smile was poison. "Ancient family history? Sentimental trinkets? Or are you looking for something specific?" Eleanor held her gaze. "I know what you're doing. Then you're cleverer than you seem. Good night, Eleanor." Marigold swept past, leaving Eleanor alone in the ransacked room. That evening, Eleanor found a single sheet of yellowed music on her pillow. The notation was in elegant script, Alistair's mother's handwriting, unmistakable from the diary Eleanor had studied. "The Lullaby," transcribed in fading ink. Attached was a note in Marigold's sharper hand. "Some melodies are better forgotten. Don't make the mistake of singing this to him." Eleanor clutched the sheet music to her chest, her resolve hardening like steel. The lullaby was the key to everything. Marigold knew it. That's why she was systematically destroying every trace, the music box, the belongings, anything that might trigger Alistair's deepest memories. But she'd made one mistake. She'd shown Eleanor exactly how powerful this melody was, and Eleanor would not let it be erased. Chapter 5. The Memory of Melody. 3 years earlier, Eleanor had been married to Alistair for 2 years when she first discovered the locked room in the East Wing. It was during one of her solitary afternoons. Alistair was in London for Parliament. The house echoed with emptiness, and she'd been wandering the manor like a ghost haunting her own home. The door stood at the end of a forgotten corridor, its wood dark with age. When Eleanor tried the handle, it opened easily, the lock having failed years ago. Inside, time had stopped. Dust motes danced in light, filtering through velvet curtains. A vanity held bottles of perfume, their contents long evaporated. Gowns hung in the wardrobe, their silk faded but still beautiful. And on a small writing desk sat a leather journal beside a silver music box. Eleanor knew immediately whose room this had been. The late Duchess, Alistair's mother, dead for 15 years, but her presence still breathed from every object. Eleanor shouldn't have touched anything. But loneliness made people do strange things, and she was so desperately lonely. The journal opened easily, its pages filled with elegant script. Eleanor read entries about estate management, social calls, the weather. Then she found the entries about Alistair. "My darling boy turns 5 today. He's so serious, so like his father already. But at night, when I sing our lullaby, he becomes a child again, soft and sweet and mine. Alistair had nightmares after the horse threw him. I sat with him for hours, humming the melody Mother taught me. By dawn, he was peaceful. This song is our secret, our connection. I pray someday he passes it to his own children. The physician says my lungs are worsening. I'm frightened of leaving Alistair so young. He needs this melody more than he knows. It's the only thing that reaches past his careful walls. I've transcribed it, hidden copies, prayed it survives me." The final entry was dated 3 days before the Duchess's death. "I sing the lullaby to Alistair every night now, though he's 12 and thinks himself too old for such things. He allows it because he knows I'm dying. Last night, he asked me to teach it to him. I did. He cried in my arms after, and I held my serious boy while he became a child again, just for a moment. This melody is love made sound. Whoever loves him next must know it." Eleanor had wept over those words, her tears staining the ancient pages. Then she'd found the music box and wound its key. The lullaby spilled out, simple and haunting, its melody embedding itself in her heart. She'd memorized it, practiced it, imagined singing it to the children she and Alistair might have one day. But there were no children, and the lullaby remained her secret, locked away like the room where she'd found it. Present day. "Mrs. Thornton, may I speak with you?" The elderly housekeeper looked up from her mending, her weathered face creasing with concern. "Of course, my lady. Is something troubling you?" Eleanor closed the door to the small sitting room where Mrs. Thornton took her afternoon tea. The old woman had served the Hawke family for 40 years, had been lady's maid to Alistair's mother, and was one of the few people in this house Eleanor trusted. "I need to ask you about the late Duchess, and a lullaby." Mrs. Thornton's needle stilled. "The lullaby. You know about it then?" "I found her diary, years ago. I learned the melody from her music box. That box has gone missing, Mrs. Thornton said carefully. Lady Marigold's doing, I'd wager. She left this on my pillow. Eleanor produced the sheet music with its threatening note. She's trying to erase every trace of it from the manor. Mrs. Thornton's lips thinned. She always hated that song. The late Duke Alistair's father, he'd speak of his first wife with such tenderness when he heard it, made Lady Marigold furious, being compared to a dead woman's memory. The lullaby meant that much? More than you know, child. Mrs. Thornton set aside her mending. The first Duchess, she sang it to Master Alistair every night from birth until she died. It was their private ritual, their connection. After she passed, the boy became so closed off, so serious, but sometimes, late at night, I'd hear him humming it in his sleep. Eleanor's heart clenched. Did he ever sing it after she died? Once, at her funeral. He was 12 years old, standing by her grave after everyone left. He sang the whole thing, perfect as she'd taught him, and then, never again, locked it away with his grief. Mrs. Thornton leaned forward. That melody is powerful, my lady. It connects to the Duke's heart in ways even he doesn't understand. It's love and loss and comfort all woven together. I want to sing it to him, to help him remember. Are you certain? Once you use it, there's no taking it back. He'll know you learned his most private pain. Eleanor met the old woman's eyes. I need him to know someone understands. That someone saw past his walls to the child who needed comfort. That I've always seen him, even when he couldn't see me. Mrs. Thornton nodded slowly. Then use it wisely. And use it when the moment is right, not before. Alistair's dreams had become strange. He'd wake in darkness, his heart racing, fragments of memory dissolving like smoke. There was always music in these dreams, a melody he couldn't quite grasp, slipping away the moment he reached for it, and a presence, someone safe, someone who made the nightmares recede. One morning, he found himself sketching before he was fully awake. His hand moved across the paper with strange certainty, drawing what the dream had shown him. A woman's silhouette, backlit by moonlight, musical notes floating around her like falling stars. And the feeling he couldn't draw feelings, but he tried anyway, adding shadows and light until the sketch felt like comfort itself. What is this? He muttered to himself, staring at the drawing. He found Eleanor in the morning room, reading. She looked up when he entered, and something in her expression made his breath catch. She was lovely when she smiled, he realized. Had he never noticed that before? I need to show you something, he said, offering the sketch. I've been having dreams. This keeps appearing. Eleanor took the paper, and he watched her face change recognition, pain, hope, all flashing across her features before she schooled them into careful neutrality. Do you know what it means? He pressed. Perhaps your heart remembers what your mind has forgotten, she said softly, handing back the sketch. That's not an answer. No, but it's the truth. She met his eyes. Some memories live deeper than conscious thought, Alistair. They survive in dreams, in feelings, in the way certain things make us inexplicably safe or sad. Your mind may not remember, but your heart might. You know what this is. This melody I can't recall. Yes. Will you tell me? Eleanor's hands folded in her lap, and he saw them tremble slightly. Not yet. Some truths need the right moment to be heard. It should have frustrated him another secret, another piece withheld, but instead he found himself trusting her. Eleanor had been nothing but honest about their cold marriage, their distant past. If she said this needed time, he believed her. Will you tell me eventually? When you're ready to hear it. The preparations for Marjorie's ball consumed the following week. The household buzzed with gossip, servants whispering as Eleanor passed. The Duke seems so much lighter with Lady Marjorie here, one maid said to another in the corridor, not noticing Eleanor nearby. Like he's remembered how to smile. Lady Marigold says, her grace is too melancholy for him, the other replied, that his recovery would progress faster without her gloominess weighing on him. Eleanor said nothing, continuing to her chambers, but each whispered word was a blade, each comparison to Marjorie a wound. She found Alistair in the library that evening, Marjorie at his side, both laughing over some shared memory from their youth. When Eleanor entered, the laughter stopped. Eleanor, Alistair said, almost guiltily, we were just discussing the ball. Marjorie was telling me about the last time I attended one of her family's events. How lovely, Eleanor said evenly. I hope you enjoy reminiscing. She turned to leave, but Marjorie's voice stopped her. Oh, Lady Eleanor, you're planning to attend the ball, aren't you? Though I understand if you'd prefer to remain here. Society events can be so overwhelming for those unused to them. The implication was clear. Eleanor was a country mouse, unsuited to the glittering world Marjorie and Alistair had once inhabited together. I'll be attending, Eleanor said quietly. With my husband. Of course. Marjorie's smile was sharp. Though, Alistair, darling, I did want to mention I have some rather important news to share with you at the ball. Something that concerns your future. Our future, really. Alistair looked confused. What news? All in good time. Marjorie touched his arm with practiced intimacy. Some announcements are better made in front of proper witnesses. Eleanor felt the trap closing. Whatever Marjorie planned, it would happen at that ball, in front of society, where Eleanor would be powerless to stop it. The night before the ball, Eleanor sat at her vanity, the sheet music laid before her. She hummed the lullaby, letting the melody fill her chambers. It was beautiful, haunting, and achingly sad, a mother's love transcribed into sound. She thought of Alistair's sketch, the silhouette in moonlight, the musical notes surrounding a figure that might have been his mother, or might have been anyone who'd ever offered him comfort, or might be me, Eleanor thought. If I'm brave enough? Tomorrow, she would enter Marjorie's carefully orchestrated trap. She would watch Alistair surrounded by people who remembered him before her, who would reinforce every lie Marjorie and Marigold had planted. But Eleanor had something they didn't. A melody that reached deeper than memory, that connected to Alistair's heart in ways even he didn't understand. She wouldn't use it prematurely. She wouldn't wield it as a weapon or manipulation. But when the moment came when Alistair needed her most, when all seemed lost, she would let the melody speak the truth her words couldn't convey. Eleanor practiced one more time, the lullaby soft in the darkness, and felt something like courage settle in her chest. Tomorrow, the war would reach its battlefield, and Eleanor Hawke would fight for her marriage with the only weapon powerful enough to pierce through lies and time, and forgetting, a melody of love her husband's heart had never truly forgotten. Chapter 6. The Ball of Deception. The Sutton estate blazed with light, every window glowing like a lantern against the night sky. Carriages lined the curved drive, disgorging London's finest in silks and jewels. Lady Marjorie's ball was the event of the season, and everyone who mattered had come to witness the Duke of Hawke's return to society. Eleanor descended from her carriage alone. Alistair had travelled earlier with Marjorie and Marigold, another small victory in their campaign to separate them. She'd chosen her gown with deliberate care, deep sapphire silk that made her skin luminous, her mother's pearls at her throat, her dark hair arranged in elegant curls rather than the severe style she'd worn for years of invisible wifehood. If this was to be her defeat, she would face it beautifully. The ballroom fell momentarily silent as she entered. Heads turned, whispers rippled through the crowd. Eleanor held her head high, moving through the sea of staring faces with the dignity of the Duchess she was. Across the room, Alistair stood beside Marjorie, and Eleanor watched his eyes find her. Something flickered across his face, surprise, recognition of a sort, an emotion he couldn't name. He took a half-step toward her before Marjorie's hand on his arm stopped him. "Your Grace," an elderly countess materialized beside Eleanor, her smile cold. "How brave of you to attend. Given the circumstances." "What circumstances would those be, Lady Pemberton?" "Well, the poor Duke's condition. So tragic, though I hear he's been making remarkable progress with the help of old friends." The emphasis on old friends was deliberate. Eleanor smiled, though it felt like broken glass. "My husband's recovery has been my primary concern." "Of course, dear, though one does wonder." The Countess leaned closer, her voice dropping to a stage whisper. "If perhaps some marriages are better forgotten, don't you think?" Eleanor excused herself before she said something unforgivable. The evening progressed like a carefully choreographed assault. Marjorie kept Alistair at her side, parading him through introductions, reminding him of people he'd known before his marriage, before Eleanor. Each familiar face was a reinforcement of the narrative. This was who he'd been, who he should be again. Eleanor watched from the periphery, sipping champagne she couldn't taste. "I heard she's been dreadfully cold to him," a woman's voice drifted from behind a potted palm. "Refuses to help him remember their marriage, as if she wants him to stay confused." "Well, one can hardly blame her," another voice replied. "If the marriage was as unhappy as Lady Marigold suggests, perhaps the Duchess is relieved he's forgotten." How calculating. to use his amnesia as an escape from a loveless union. Eleanor's fingers tightened on her glass. She wanted to scream that it was lies, all lies. But what proof did she have? 5 years of loving a man who'd never loved her back wasn't evidence, it was just pathetic. Marigold swept past, trailing sympathetic society matrons. Such a difficult situation, she was saying. Eleanor has tried her best, I'm sure, but the strain has been too much. The Duke needs people who knew him before, who can help him find himself again. The implication was clear. Eleanor was the problem, the obstacle to Alistair's recovery. When Alistair finally approached Eleanor, she was standing near the terrace doors, trying to breathe through the suffocating weight of whispers and stares. "Eleanor," he offered his hand. "I believe propriety demands we dance." "Propriety," she echoed. "Of course." He led her to the floor as a waltz began. His hand settled at her waist, and Eleanor felt the familiar distance in his touch. Polite, proper, impersonal. "You look beautiful tonight," he said as they began to move. "I should have said so earlier. You were occupied." "Marjorie was introducing me to people. She says I knew them all well, though I confess most seem like strangers." He guided her through a turn. "Everyone tells me different things about who I was, who we were. I don't know what to believe." Eleanor met his eyes. "Then don't believe anyone. Discover who you are now. The past will come when it's ready." "That's remarkably trusting, given that everyone seems intent on convincing me our marriage was a disaster, was it not?" Alistair's hand tightened fractionally at her waist. "I'm beginning to suspect that whatever it was, it deserved better than I gave it." Hope fluttered in Eleanor's chest, fragile and dangerous. Then Marjorie's voice cut through the music. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I might have your attention." The orchestra stuttered to a halt. Dancers stopped mid-step. The entire ballroom turned toward the dais where Marjorie stood, radiant in crimson silk, a folded letter in her hand. "I apologize for the interruption," Marjorie continued, her voice carrying perfectly, "but I have discovered something that concerns us all, particularly His Grace the Duke of Hawk." Alistair's hand dropped from Eleanor's waist. What is she doing? Eleanor knew. The trap was springing shut. "Shortly before his tragic accident," Marjorie announced, "His Grace entrusted me with a letter, a private correspondence, expressing his deepest feelings about his marriage to Lady Eleanor." The ballroom erupted in shocked whispers. "I debated sharing this publicly," Marjorie continued, "every word a perfectly rehearsed lie. But given the Duke's condition, I felt it my duty to ensure his true wishes were known." She unfolded the letter with theatrical precision. "My dearest Marjorie," she read, "I can no longer continue in a union that brings neither of us happiness. Eleanor is a good woman, but we were not meant for each other. I intend to seek an annulment. I pray she will understand and find someone who can love her as she deserves." The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor felt the world tilt. She knew, even from across the room, that the handwriting was forged. The phrasing was wrong, too emotional for Alistair's careful precision, too convenient for Marjorie's purposes. But she had no proof, and the entire aristocracy of London was staring at her with a mixture of pity and judgment. "That letter is a forgery," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her. "How dare you?" Marjorie's outrage was perfectly performed. "Are you accusing me of—" "Yes." Eleanor moved toward the dais. "That is not my husband's handwriting, and even if it were, he never shared confidences with you about our marriage." "Alistair," Marjorie appealed to him directly, "you don't remember. I know, but we were close before your marriage. Very close. You trusted me with your private thoughts." Alistair stood frozen between them, the letter in his hands now, his expression confused. He studied the handwriting. "I don't remember writing this." "Of course you don't, dear boy," Marigold interjected, stepping forward with perfect timing. "Your memory is compromised, but I can testify to the truth of it. You came to me several times expressing unhappiness in your marriage. You spoke of duty versus desire, of being trapped by obligation." "That's a lie," Eleanor said, but her voice was drowned out by the rising whispers. "Lady Eleanor," the Countess of Pemberton said with false sympathy, "perhaps it's time to accept the truth. Even if the letter's authenticity is questionable, the sentiment is not. Anyone can see the Duke is happier with Lady Marjorie than he ever was with you." The ballroom murmured agreement. Eleanor watched Alistair's face, saw him wavering, saw the doubt Marjorie and Marigold had so carefully cultivated, finally bearing fruit. "Excuse me," Eleanor whispered, and fled before the tears could fall. The garden was cool and dark, lit only by scattered lanterns. Eleanor found a bench hidden among the roses and finally allowed herself to break. 5 years of loving him, 5 years of hoping, and now, to lose him not to death or illness, but to lies and manipulation and a forged letter, it was too much. The tears came in silent waves, her shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. She'd been so strong, so patient, so careful, and none of it mattered. She'd lost anyway. Without thinking, Eleanor closed her eyes and began to hum. The lullaby spilled from her lips, broken and soft, carried on the night breeze. A melody of love and comfort and loss, everything she felt woven into its ancient notes. She didn't hear Alistair enter the garden, didn't see him freeze in the shadows, the melody hitting him with the force of a physical blow. Didn't see his face transform as memories cascaded through his mind, incomplete, fragmented, but undeniably real. A nursery bathed in moonlight, gentle hands smoothing his hair, a voice singing this exact melody, soft and loving, making him feel safe when the world was too big and frightening. "Sleep now, my darling, the stars watch above." His mother's voice, his mother's hands, his mother's love, transcribed into sound, and overlapping that memory, another image. Eleanor, years ago, before their marriage, during, somewhere in this manner, humming this same melody when she thought she was alone. Eleanor knew this song, his mother's most private gift to him, the lullaby she'd sung every night until she died. How did Eleanor know it? Alistair's knees nearly buckled. He gripped the garden wall, his breath coming in sharp gasps. The melody continued, Eleanor's voice broken with tears, the lullaby, a prayer or a farewell or both. And Alistair understood, with sudden devastating clarity, that he'd been given something precious, a woman who'd loved him enough to learn his deepest pain, to memorize the comfort his mother had given him, to hold that knowledge tenderly for 5 years while he looked right through her. The lullaby filled the garden, filled the cracks in his memory, filled the emptiness where love should have lived all along. And Alistair, Duke of Hawk, stood in the shadows and remembered not everything, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to know he'd been a fool, enough to know he was losing something irreplaceable, enough to know that the melody of his heart had been singing all along, waiting for him to finally listen. Chapter 7. The Melody of Doubt. Alistair stood frozen in the garden shadows, his entire body rigid as Eleanor's lullaby washed over him. The melody was simple, haunting, and achingly familiar in a way that made his chest tighten with emotions he couldn't name. Images flickered through his mind like candlelight through curtains, a darkened room, gentle hands stroking his hair, the feeling of absolute safety, a woman's voice singing these exact notes, soft and loving, making the monsters under the bed disappear. But the images were fragments, incomplete. The harder he grasped for them, the faster they dissolved. He took a step forward, leaves crunching beneath his boots. Eleanor's humming stopped abruptly. She looked up, tears streaming down her face, and in her expression he saw hope and fear warring for dominance. "That song," his voice came out rough. "I've heard it before." Eleanor stood, her hands trembling. "Alistair, I can explain. Your Grace." Marjorie's voice shattered the moment like breaking glass. She swept into the garden with Marigold close behind, both women radiating false concern. "We've been searching everywhere for you. The guests are worried you disappeared so suddenly." Alistair's head pounded, the fragmentary images still dancing at the edges of his consciousness. "I followed Eleanor. She was upset." Marigold's sharp eyes took in the scene. Eleanor's tear-stained face, Alistair's disoriented expression, the charged atmosphere between them. "What has happened here?" Marigold asked, her voice dripping with maternal worry. "She was singing," Alistair said, his gaze still locked on Eleanor. "A melody I recognize, but I can't remember from where. It felt important." Eleanor took a step toward him. "It is important. It's... Of course you recognize it, dear stepson." Marigold interrupted smoothly, moving between them with practiced ease. "That melody has been played at dozens of society gatherings. Every young lady learns it on the pianoforte. It's a traditional English air, quite common, really." "That's not true." Eleanor's voice rose with desperation. "This lullaby is..." Marjorie's laugh cut through Eleanor's protest, condescending and cruel. "How desperate, Lady Eleanor. Using a common tune, and pretending it holds special meaning. This is precisely the manipulation we warned you about, Your Grace. Alistair looked between the three women, his head throbbing. The melody still echoed in his mind, pulling at something deep and fundamental. But Marigold's words made logical sense. How could he trust feelings when everyone around him was telling him different truths? I felt something, he said slowly. When I heard her sing, "Emotion is powerful," Marigold said gently, placing a hand on his arm, "and the poor Duchess has been under tremendous strain. Perhaps the weight of maintaining a marriage that never had love has finally broken her. She's reaching for anything to create a connection that was never there." "You're lying," Eleanor said, her voice shaking. "You know exactly what that melody is. You've been destroying every trace of it, from the manor, the music box, your late wife's belongings." "My late wife's belongings?" Marigold's eyebrows rose in perfect surprise. "Eleanor, dear, what are you suggesting? That I would destroy family heirlooms out of some imagined conspiracy?" Other guests had begun filtering into the garden, drawn by the raised voices. They formed a loose circle around the scene, avid for scandal. Lady Hartington, resplendent in plum silk, stepped forward. "Lady Eleanor, I couldn't help but overhear. That melody you were humming, I learned it as a girl. My music teacher said it was a traditional English air, taught to generations of young ladies. There's nothing unique about it." "I learned it too," another woman chimed in. "From my governess in 1833, and I," said a third. "It's quite a common tune, really." Eleanor's face drained of colour. She looked at each woman in turn, recognizing them all as members of Marjorie's intimate circle, understanding with sinking clarity that this had been orchestrated. "They're lying," Eleanor said, but her voice had lost its conviction. How could she fight testimony from a dozen society matrons? Alistair pressed his fingers to his temples, the headache intensifying. I can't." The fragments of memory were slipping away, replaced by the logic of what he was being told. A common melody, a desperate wife, manipulation disguised as intimacy, but something in his chest ached, as if his heart knew a truth his mind couldn't grasp. "Lord Ashford," Marigold called out, spotting the elderly gentleman weaving through the garden with uncertain steps. "You knew the late Duchess well. Perhaps you can clarify matters for us." Lord Ashford stumbled forward, his eyes glazed, his words slurred. Alistair could smell the wine on him from several feet away, far more wine than any gentleman should consume at a respectable ball. "Lord Ashford," Marigold said sweetly, "do you recall if the late Duchess had any particular songs she favoured? Any unique melodies she sang to young Alistair?" Ashford squinted, swaying slightly. "Duchess? Songs? There was. Something with—" He trailed off, unable to form coherent thoughts. "As you can see," Marjorie said with false sympathy, "poor Lord Ashford is in no condition to provide testimony. Though I'm certain if he could, he would confirm that the late Duchess, like all mothers, sang her child common nursery rhymes and popular airs." Eleanor watched her last potential ally fail spectacularly, Marjorie's careful planning evident in every detail. Of course Ashford had been plied with wine all evening. Of course he couldn't testify now. "Alistair," Eleanor said, her voice breaking, "please, just listen to me. That lullaby." "I need clarity," Alistair interrupted, taking a step back from her. His voice was strained, exhausted. "Everyone claims to know the truth. Everyone has a different version of who I was, who we were. All I have is confusion and a melody I can't even remember properly." "Your Grace, I believe you need rest," Marigold said firmly, taking his arm. "This evening has been far too taxing. Let us return to Hawk Manor immediately." She turned to address the assembled crowd, her voice carrying with practiced authority. "I'm certain you all understand that the Duke requires peace and quiet to continue his recovery. This unfortunate scene has only demonstrated how fragile his condition remains." Then, with devastating precision, she looked at Eleanor. "Lady Eleanor, perhaps it's best if you remain in London for a few days while Alistair regains his strength. The strain of your presence seems to be hindering rather than helping his recovery." It was phrased as a suggestion, delivered as a command, and witnessed by half of London society. Eleanor reached for Alistair, her hand trembling. "Alistair, please, don't leave like this. Just give me a chance to explain." He gently but firmly removed her hand from his sleeve. The gesture was courteous, distant, final. "I'm sorry, Eleanor," he said quietly, and she heard genuine regret in his voice. I can't distinguish truth from deception right now. I need time to think, to understand what's real. The look on Eleanor's face nearly broke him. Pain, betrayal, and a desperate hope dying in her eyes. But Marigold was already guiding him away, Marjorie flanking his other side, the two women forming a barrier between him and Eleanor. "Come, dear boy," Marigold murmured. "Let's get you home." Eleanor stood motionless as she watched them walk away. Behind her, the society ladies whispered with barely concealed glee. How mortifying for her. "Did you see his face?" He didn't believe a word she said. Using a common melody to manipulate a confused man. How low can one sink? Lady Marigold is quite right. The Duchess's presence is clearly detrimental to his recovery. Mrs. Thornton materialized at Eleanor's side, her weathered face creased with concern. "Come, my lady. Let me take you away from here." Eleanor allowed herself to be led from the garden, away from the whispering crowd, through the ballroom where dancers had resumed as if nothing extraordinary had happened, out to where their carriage waited in the drive. Only when they were safely inside, the door closed against prying eyes, did Eleanor speak. "He felt something," she whispered, staring at her hands. "I know he did. When he heard the lullaby, his face changed. There was recognition. Mrs. Thornton. For just a moment, he remembered. The lullaby stirred his heart, my lady," Mrs. Thornton said gently. "But his mind hasn't caught up yet. They twisted what he felt into doubt and confusion. They had witnesses. All those women claiming they'd learned the melody as girls. How do I fight that? Those women are Marjorie's creatures, lying through their painted smiles. But the Duke's heart knows the truth, even if his mind is clouded." Eleanor looked out the window as their carriage pulled away. In the distance, she could see Marigold's carriage carrying Alistair back to Hawke Manor, back to the manor where Marigold and Marjorie would continue their campaign, whispering poison, rewriting truth, ensuring he never trusted his own instincts. "I've lost," Eleanor said softly. "Haven't I? The lullaby was supposed to help him remember, but they turned it into evidence of my manipulation. They're too clever, too prepared. I can't fight them." "You haven't lost until you stop fighting," Mrs. Thornton said firmly. But Eleanor felt the weight of defeat settling over her like a shroud. She'd used her most powerful weapon, and it had been deflected, twisted, made into something ugly and desperate. "I will not give up on you, Alistair," she whispered into the night, watching the lights of Marjorie's estate disappear behind them. "Even if you've given up on me." But her voice cracked with doubt, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Eleanor wondered if love alone was enough to win this war. Some battles, she was learning, couldn't be won with patience and devotion. Some battles required weapons she didn't possess, allies she'd never had, and a ruthlessness she'd never cultivated. And as the carriage carried her toward an empty townhouse in London, away from her husband and her home, Eleanor felt the cold certainty of defeat settling into her bones. The lullaby had failed, and with it, perhaps, had her last hope of reaching the heart of a man who'd forgotten how to love her. Chapter 8. The Trap Closes. The London townhouse was small, dark, and smelled of mildew. Eleanor stood in its cramped parlour, watching rain streak down grimy windows, and felt the full weight of her isolation settle over her like a burial shroud. She'd been effectively banished. Marigold had made it clear to all of society the Duchess's presence was detrimental to the Duke's recovery. Eleanor's letters to Hawke Manor went unanswered. Her attempts to return were met with polite but firm refusals from servants following their mistress's orders. She was cut off, alone, powerless. "My lady," Mrs. Thornton entered carrying tea, her weathered face drawn with worry. "You must eat something. You've had nothing since yesterday." "I'm not hungry." "Starving yourself won't help His Grace." Eleanor turned from the window. "Nothing I do helps him. That's become painfully clear." Mrs. Thornton set down the tea tray with a sharp clink. "So you're giving up? After everything? What would you have me do? Storm the manor? They control everything, his environment, his information, his very thoughts. I'm fighting shadows while they wield steel. Then we find different weapons." But Eleanor had no weapons left, and with each passing day, she felt Alistair slipping further away. At Hawke Manor, Marigold orchestrated her masterpiece with the precision of a military campaign. "Dr. Blackwood," she said, introducing the man she'd brought from London, "a specialist in disorders of the mind. I've asked him to examine Alistair's condition." The doctor was thin, sharp-featured, with calculating eyes that spoke of a man accustomed to selling convenient diagnoses to wealthy patrons. He examined Alistair thoroughly, asking questions designed to highlight confusion rather than clarity, noting every hesitation as evidence of mental fragility. "Your Grace," Dr. Blackwood said gravely, "your condition is more delicate than I initially feared. The trauma to your head has left your mind in a precarious state. Any emotional stress could cause permanent damage, perhaps even complete mental collapse." Alistair felt fear coil in his chest. "What are you suggesting? That you must be shielded from distressing influences? Limit your interactions to calm, familiar presences. Avoid situations that cause agitation or confusion." "And my wife is precisely the sort of distressing influence, I mean," Marigold interjected smoothly. "The poor woman means well, but her presence clearly agitates you. The scene at Lady Marjorie's ball demonstrated that quite plainly." Dr. Blackwood nodded sagely. "A fresh start might be precisely what you need, Your Grace. Rather than attempting to excavate a past that may be better left forgotten, perhaps focus on building something new with people who bring you peace rather than turmoil." Alistair's head throbbed. The laudanum the doctor had prescribed was making his thoughts sluggish, but the logic seemed sound. Eleanor had been upset at the ball. The Lullaby incident had confused him terribly. Perhaps distance was wise. "I should at least write to her," he said. "Explain." "She's already written to you," Marigold lied effortlessly, saying she needs time to herself, that the strain of the situation has been difficult for her. "I have the letter in my study if you'd like to see it." Another forgery, no doubt, but Alistair's addled mind accepted it. "I see," he said quietly, though something in his gut twisted with wrongness. Eleanor stood before St. Michael's Church, where Alistair's mother had been laid to rest 20 years ago. If she could find the funeral records, perhaps there would be some mention of the Lullaby, some documentation of its significance. The rector was sympathetic but apologetic. "I'm terribly sorry, Lady Eleanor. Those particular records seem to have been damaged. Water intrusion in the archives, we believe. Several pages from that period are missing entirely. Water damage. How convenient." Eleanor knew the truth. Marigold had been here first, systematically destroying evidence just as she'd destroyed the music box and ransacked the late Duchess's belongings. Every trail Eleanor followed ended in carefully orchestrated dead ends. She sought out Lord Ashford at his club, catching him sober for once. But when she mentioned the Lullaby, his face paled. "I'm sorry, Lady Eleanor. I can't help you." "Can't or won't?" His hands trembled. "I have debts, gambling debts. Lady Marigold knows about them. She's made it clear that if I speak to you about certain matters, those debts will be called in immediately. I'd be ruined. Lord Ashford, please. This is about my husband's life." "I'm sorry," he stood abruptly. "I truly am, but I have a family to protect. I cannot help you." He fled before Eleanor could press further. At Hawke Manor, Marjorie had become a permanent fixture. She brought Alistair books on subjects he'd once enjoyed: estate management, classical philosophy, agricultural innovation. They played chess in the library, engaged in intelligent discussions about crop rotation and parliamentary reform. It was pleasant, easy, uncomplicated. Marjorie never pressed him about the past, never demanded he remember things he couldn't recall. She existed entirely in the present, making him laugh with witty observations, challenging him intellectually without emotional weight. "You seem different today," she observed one afternoon, noting his distraction. "Is something troubling you?" "I had that dream again. The melody, the woman in moonlight." He showed her the sketch he'd drawn upon waking. "It feels important, but every time I try to grasp it, it disappears." Marjorie studied the drawing with carefully practiced concern. "Perhaps your mind is trying to create meaning where none exists, searching for profound connections because the alternative that some things are simply lost is too painful to accept." "Perhaps, wouldn't it be simpler," she said gently, "to start fresh, to build something new rather than excavate something broken?" Alistair looked at her beautiful, uncomplicated Marjorie, who represented ease and familiarity without the pain of forgotten obligations. "I suppose it would," he admitted. She smiled and moved her chess piece. Checkmate. That evening, Marigold presented Alistair with new evidence. "I was going through your father's old papers," she said, producing a leather journal. "And I found this, your own diary, from before the accident." Alistair opened it, seeing what appeared to be his handwriting close enough to deceive a man who couldn't remember writing it. The entries spoke of dissatisfaction, of feeling trapped by duty, of a marriage that brought neither joy nor comfort, of regret and yearning for freedom. "Was I really that unhappy?" he asked, his voice hollow. "You were trapped by obligation," Marjorie said softly. She'd appeared at the door as if summoned, her timing perfect. "But you don't have to be anymore." Marigold produced another document. "I also found this a letter to your solicitor, discussing options for annulment. You never sent it, but the intention was clear. More forgeries, more carefully crafted lies." But Alistair had no memories to contradict them, and the laudanum kept his thoughts too fuzzy to question deeply. He accepted what he was told because he had nothing else to believe. Meanwhile, Eleanor's investigation reached a desperate conclusion. Mrs. Thornton arrived at the townhouse one evening, trembling with fury and carrying a small bag. "They've dismissed me," she announced. "Lady Marigold claims I'm too old to serve effectively. 30 years of service, and she casts me out like rubbish. Oh, Mrs. Thornton, I'm so sorry." "Don't be. It's a blessing. Now I can tell you what I overheard." The old woman's eyes blazed. "They're planning something at the chapel. Tomorrow. I heard Marjorie speaking to the vicar about a special ceremony to secure the Duke's future." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "A ceremony? A wedding ceremony?" "I believe so. They're moving quickly, before anyone can stop them." Eleanor's mind raced. A wedding while Alistair was still married to her would be illegal unless Marigold had found a way to invalidate their first marriage. Alistair's supposed mental incompetence. Perhaps forged documents proving the marriage was never legitimate. "I have to go back," Eleanor said. "I have to stop this. They'll never let you through the gates. Then I won't use the gates." The next evening, as twilight painted Hawk Manor in shades of purple and gold, a figure in borrowed servant's clothes slipped through the estate's back entrance. Eleanor had learned the servant's routes during her years as an invisible duchess. Now that knowledge served her. She pressed close to the walls, keeping to shadows, her heart hammering. Hidden in her bodice was the last remaining copy of the Lullaby, the sheet music Marigold had left on her pillow as a threat. Tomorrow, there would be a ceremony. Eleanor didn't know exactly what Marigold had planned, but she knew it would be the final blow. Once Alistair was legally bound to Marjorie, once their marriage was nullified or annulled, Eleanor would lose him forever. She crouched near the chapel, watching lights flicker in the windows, hearing voices preparing for tomorrow's event. "If I lose you tomorrow," Eleanor whispered to the darkened manor, her hand pressed against the cold stone, "at least you'll know someone loved you enough to fight until the very end." The Lullaby's sheet music crinkled against her heart. She had one weapon left, one chance. And tomorrow, in that chapel, she would use it even if it meant revealing herself, even if it meant public humiliation, even if Alistair chose Marjorie anyway. At least he would know the truth. At least he would hear the melody one last time, and perhaps, just perhaps, his heart would remember what his mind had forgotten. Eleanor settled into her hiding place, pulling her cloak tight against the evening chill, and waited for dawn. The final battle was coming, and she would face it alone, armed with nothing but a melody and a love that refused to die. Chapter 9. The Wedding That Wasn't. The chapel bells tolled 9 times as carefully selected guests filed into Hawk Manor's ancient stone sanctuary. They were all Marigold's allies, society matrons who'd whispered poison about Eleanor, gentlemen who owed the Dowager Duchess favors, witnesses who would swear to whatever version of truth benefited their patroness. The morning light streamed through stained glass, painting the stone floor in fractured rainbows. Flowers adorned every surface, white roses and lilies, symbols of purity and new beginnings. The irony would have been laughable if it weren't so devastating. Alistair stood at the altar in formal mourning dress, his expression distant and glazed. The laudanum doctor, Blackwood had administered the night before, still clouded his thoughts, making everything feel dreamlike and unreal. Beside him, Marjorie was radiant in ivory silk, her golden hair crowned with orange blossoms, her smile perfect and practiced. She played the role of blushing bride with consummate skill, though her eyes held the sharp calculation of a general surveying a conquered battlefield. The vicar cleared his throat nervously. He'd been told this was a renewal of commitment, a fresh beginning for the Duke whose memory had failed him. Most guests believed the fiction. Those who knew Alistair was still legally married to Eleanor had been assured she'd agreed to dissolve the marriage quietly, to spare the Duke unnecessary stress. All lies, all carefully orchestrated deception, and Eleanor was about to shatter it all. She'd slipped into the manor with the morning staff, her heart hammering so violently she feared it might give her away. The borrowed servant's dress hung loose on her frame. She'd lost weight these past weeks, grief and worry stealing her appetite. Her hair was hidden beneath a plain cap, her face pale from sleepless nights and desperate plans. No one recognized the Duchess in the shabby servant girl carrying a wine pitcher for the post-ceremony toast. Eleanor took her position along the chapel's side wall, among the other servants waiting to serve refreshments. From here, she had a clear view of the altar, of Alistair standing beside the woman who'd schemed to steal him. Every word of the ceremony cut like a blade. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." Eleanor's hands trembled, making the pitcher shake. She gripped it tighter, her knuckles white. At the altar, Alistair swayed slightly. The laudanum made him compliant, drowsy, disconnected from reality. He looked at Marguerite and felt nothing. No love, no desire, not even the comfortable friendship she'd been cultivating. Just emptiness. His head throbbed with the now familiar ache. Images flickered through his mind, a melody he couldn't quite recall. Moonlight through curtains, someone crying. The fragments teased at the edges of his consciousness, always just out of reach. The vicar's voice droned on, the words washing over him like distant waves. To have and to hold, from this day forward. Alistair tried to focus, but the words felt meaningless. This ceremony, this woman beside him, this entire situation, something was profoundly wrong. Every instinct screamed at him to stop, to wait, to understand what he was doing before it was too late. But the laudanum smothered his instincts beneath chemical fog. "Alistair Hawke, Duke of Hawke," the vicar intoned, "do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" The chapel fell silent. Alistair opened his mouth to speak the words that would seal his fate. And Eleanor's trembling hands finally lost their battle. The wine pitcher crashed to the stone floor, shattering in an explosion of ceramic and deep red liquid that looked disturbingly like blood. Every head turned. Eleanor stood frozen, exposed, her servant's cap slipping from her head. Her dark hair tumbled free, and in the chapel's light, despite her shabby clothes and pale face, she was unmistakable. "Eleanor?" someone whispered. She stumbled, her legs weak, her vision blurring with tears. In her panic and overwhelming grief, watching the man she loved about to marry another woman, knowing this was her last chance, her final moment, she did the only thing her shattered heart knew how to do. She began to hum. Soft at first, broken, desperate, the lullaby. The melody filled the chapel, achingly pure, despite the tears streaming down her face. It floated through the sacred space, wrapping around ancient stones and modern hearts alike, and Alistair's entire world exploded. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. His knees buckled. He gripped the altar to stay standing, his vision whiting out as memories crashed over him like a tidal wave, drowning him in everything he'd lost. A darkened nursery, his mother's face, young and beautiful, leaning over his small bed, her voice singing this exact melody, soft and loving. "Sleep now, my darling. The stars watch above." The feeling of complete safety, of being utterly, unconditionally loved. Years later, 12 years old, standing at her grave after everyone had left, singing the lullaby one final time before locking it and his grief away forever. More years. The chapel. He was alone, or thought he was, until a young woman appeared. Eleanor, barely 17, visiting with her family. She'd found him there, weeping, and instead of intruding with words, she'd simply sat beside him, sharing his grief without demanding he explain it. Their wedding day. Eleanor walking toward him, hope shining in her eyes, and him, so focused on duty, barely seeing her at all. 5 years of marriage in rapid succession, Eleanor dining alone while he worked, Eleanor reading by the fire while he ignored her presence. Eleanor reaching for his hand and him pulling away, always pulling away. The night before the accident, this was new, a memory the amnesia had stolen, completely standing in his study window, hearing singing from the garden, moving outside to find Eleanor alone among the roses, humming a melody that stopped his heart. The lullaby, his mother's lullaby, the secret he'd never shared with anyone. Eleanor, knowing it somehow, singing it into the darkness, and Alistair feeling his frozen heart crack open for the first time in 5 years of marriage. Standing there in the moonlight, deciding, Tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll tell her. Tomorrow I'll try to truly be the husband she deserves. Then the accident, the saddle breaking, the fall, the darkness, and waking up to nothing, having lost the chance he'd finally found the courage to take. He remembered everything, every cold dinner, every distant conversation, every moment of Eleanor's patient, unrewarded love, every moment of his own blindness, his cruelty through neglect, his failure to see the treasure standing right before him. No, Alistair breathed, his voice breaking. No, no, no. Stop that awful noise. Marigold's scream shattered the chapel's reverent silence. She leaped to her feet, her carefully maintained composure exploding into rage, her face contorted with hatred so pure it shocked the assembled witnesses. That wretched song. I am sick of that melody. It haunted me when she was alive, and now... She stopped, hand flying to her mouth, realizing too late what she'd revealed, but Alistair had heard enough. He turned from the altar, the laudanum fog burned away by the intensity of returned memory. His eyes blazed with clarity, for the first time in weeks, clarity and fury and devastating understanding. You, he said, his voice shaking as he stared at Marigold, you've been poisoning me, controlling me, the laudanum, the false doctor, the forged documents, all of it. He swung toward Marjorie. And you've been complicit in this charade, using my confusion to steal what was never yours. Marjorie tried to recover, her voice honeyed with false concern. Alistair, darling, you're confused. The accident has left you disoriented. We're only trying to help. I remember the accident. Alistair cut her off, his voice like steel. I remember the saddle being tampered with, the girth deliberately weakened, and I remember who had access to the stables, who had motive to want me incapacitated or dead. He turned to Marigold. You tried to kill me, and when that failed, you tried to steal my life instead. The chapel erupted in shocked whispers. Alistair didn't wait for Marigold's response. He strode down the aisle toward Eleanor, who stood trembling among the shattered pottery, tears streaming down her face, still humming the lullaby in broken fragments. The crowd parted before him like water. He reached her and gently, reverently, cupped her face in his hands. The only woman who knows the melody of my heart, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the chapel, is my wife, and she is standing right here. Eleanor's humming broke into a sob. Alistair, I remember, he whispered, his own tears falling now. I remember everything, the garden, the night before the accident. Hearing you sing and realizing I'd been a fool for 5 years, I was going to tell you the next morning that I wanted to truly be your husband, that I wanted to try, and then the accident took it all away. He turned to address the assembled guests, his voice ringing with authority. This ceremony is a fraud. I am already married. I have been married, for 5 years, to the woman I was too blind to love until I lost everything. You're not in your right mind, Marigold shrieked, her composure completely shattered. The documents prove you're mentally incompetent. This marriage is invalid. The documents are forgeries, a strong voice called from the chapel entrance. Lord Ashford stood there, sober and determined, with the magistrate beside him and several constables at his back. I've been a coward, Ashford announced, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Lady Marigold threatened me into silence with my gambling debts, but no more. I'm prepared to testify to everything. The sabotaged saddle, the forged letters, the fabricated medical reports, the bribed physician, all of it. The magistrate stepped forward, producing a leather portfolio. We have statements from the stable hand who was paid to weaken His Grace's saddle, analysis from handwriting experts proving the documents are forgeries, financial records showing payments to Dr. Blackwood from Lady Marigold's accounts. Marigold's face drained of color. Then, with a desperate animal sound, she lunged toward Eleanor. Alistair moved with the speed of instinct, putting himself between them. His voice was arctic, deadly calm. Touch her, and I will see you hanged for attempted murder. And make no mistake, the evidence we have is more than sufficient for that charge. The constables moved forward, restraining Marigold as she struggled and screamed. Marjorie, seeing her carefully laid plans crumbling to ash, tried to slip toward the side door. Lady Marjorie, the magistrate called, you'll want to stay. We have questions about your role in this conspiracy. Marjorie's perfect composure finally cracked. She fled the chapel in a swirl of white silk, leaving gasps and whispers in her wake. As the constables led Marigold away and the chaos slowly settled, Alistair turned back to Eleanor. She stood among the broken pottery and spilled wine, still dressed in servant's grey, her face pale and tear-stained. But she'd never looked more beautiful to him. He knelt, the Duke of Hawk, kneeling before a woman in servant's clothes in front of half of London society. "Forgive me," he said, his voice breaking, "for 5 years of coldness, for taking your love for granted, for being too blind, too proud, too consumed by duty to see the treasure standing before me, for wasting 5 years we could have spent being truly happy." Eleanor pulled him to his feet, her hands trembling as they framed his face. "There's nothing to forgive," she whispered. "You're here now. You remember. That's all that matters." "No." Alistair caught her hands, holding them against his chest where his heart hammered. "It's not enough. I want to do this right. I want us to begin again, not with duty or obligation, but with truth and love." He turned to the vicar, who stood at the altar looking utterly bewildered. "Father, would you marry us? Truly marry us, with love and intention rather than duty and arrangement?" The vicar's confused expression melted into a genuine smile. "It would be my honor, Your Grace." And there, in the same chapel where a fraudulent ceremony had almost destroyed them, Alistair and Eleanor renewed their vows. This time, when the vicar asked if Alistair took Eleanor as his wife, his "I do" rang strong and certain. This time, when Eleanor spoke her vows, she wasn't hoping for a love that might someday come. She was accepting a love finally, freely given. This time, when Alistair kissed his bride, it was with 5 years of unspoken love finally set free, with regret and hope and desperate tenderness all woven together. The chapel erupted in applause, even the society witnesses, moved despite themselves by the raw emotion of the moment. 6 months later, the nursery glowed in the golden light of late afternoon. Eleanor sat in the rocking chair that had once belonged to Alistair's mother, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly. She hummed the lullaby, letting the melody float through the room like a blessing. Alistair entered quietly, not wanting to disturb the moment, but Eleanor felt his presence immediately. She always did now. No more distance, no more walls. He moved behind her, wrapping his arms around them, both his wife and their unborn child. "Our child will know this melody," Eleanor said softly, tilting her head back against his shoulder. "They'll know it means safety, love, and home," Alistair added, his voice thick with emotion. "Just as my mother intended, just as you preserved through 5 years of my blindness. And they'll know," Eleanor said, turning to look at him, "that even when all seems lost, love finds a way." Alistair kissed her temple, breathing in the scent of her hair, marveling still at how close he'd come to losing this forever. Together, they hummed the lullaby that had saved them. The melody floated through the nursery, a promise passed from generation to generation, from Alistair's mother to him, from him to Eleanor, from both of them to the child who would soon fill this room with new life. Some songs, they both now knew, are too powerful to forget. They're written not in memory, but in the very fabric of the soul itself. They survive amnesia and manipulation and time. They wait, patient as love itself, for the moment when hearts are finally ready to hear them. And in that moment, as twilight painted the nursery in gold and the lullaby wrapped around them like a blessing, Alistair understood the truth his mother had known all along. The melody of the heart is the only song that truly matters. And so, the Duke of Hawk finally learned what his heart had known all along, that true love isn't found in duty or obligation, but in the quiet devotion of someone who sees us, even when we cannot see ourselves. Eleanor's patience, Alistair's redemption, a melody that conquered amnesia, lies, and time itself. If this story of love, loss, and second chances touched your heart, please take a moment to leave a like on this video. Your support helps us bring more of these emotional historical romance tales to life. And if you're new here, welcome to Lyra's Romance Stories, where every tale reminds us that love, true love, always finds a way, even through the darkest of circumstances. Subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. We have many more journeys of the heart, waiting for you, tales of passion, redemption, and the kind of love that refuses to surrender. Drop a comment below and tell us, what was your favorite moment from Eleanor and Alistair's story? Was it when she first hummed the lullaby in the garden, when Alistair finally remembered everything, or that beautiful moment when he knelt before her in servant's clothes and asked for her forgiveness? We love hearing from you, and we read every single comment. Until next time, remember, The melody of the heart is the only song that truly matters. This is Lyra's Romance Stories. Thank you for listening, and may your own heart always know its song.
God rest ye merry gentlemen, let nothing you dismay.
Ah, finally arrived. It looks splendid, doesn't it?